The way that we're using AI is to do a better interpretation of the signals that we measure to make a better inference about what's truly happening, uh, in our minds, in our emotions. And then when we help people by creating these different training paradigms to train these different core skills, can we make a better decision about what we recommend to do? And can we make those exercises themselves more personalized and adaptive? Because this is not a one size fits all situation. We're so different.
Chris, it is so great to have you back on Untangle. I'm really excited to talk to you today.
Yay!
Yay, finally. I want to start, I just want to kind of set the stage for our listeners. What initially started your interest in brain health and then in brain training? Just tell us a little bit about what your story is there.
Wow. I mean, that takes me back a long, long way, to be honest. But I think initially, I don't think I knew I was interested in this. And I was more interested in the challenges that I faced as a human being trying to operate, in this world that we live in, where we are totally overwhelmed and bombarded with information. And so this is back when I was in a more academic pursuit. I was doing research at the University of Toronto. And I was very interested in the possibility of a technology helping me to manage my challenges better. So kind of like the personal assistant, but in a way where it could continuously, monitor what was happening for me moment to moment in life. Could collect and store all this information, and then could distill things down and present things back, in a very contextually relevant way, and also at the right times. And this is something that, now fast forward, I mean, I think this is like more than 15 years ago that I was working on this. It's finally happening. I mean, the AI is doing this to us right now. It is starting to really get a better handle on the information we live in so we can interact with it better. But part of that initiative that I was working on was trying to better understand the state of the human being so a computer agent system could best interact. So for example, if you were going to ask somebody a question, you don't just blurt out your question. You wait to see if it's a good time or if the person is in the right emotional, cognitive state to receive whatever you're going to ask. And that kind of, question really got me interested in our ability to measure brain activity so we could really see if a computer or an agent could have a better understanding of how do I talk to, the person I'm working with.
Let me ask you a question. When you say your state, are you talking about your consciousness? Are you talking about the logistics of what you do from one moment to the next? I mean, what is the extent to which you were thinking at that time about how technology could support different parts of you?
Yeah. So like on a really practical standpoint, it's what's your current context? Where are you? What are you doing? What are you trying to do? But at the level of someone's brain state, it's really about what's your state of consciousness and how are you feeling? And I think we can all relate to this concept of attention. Where is our attention? And are we distracted? When we are in attention, we often don't want to be distracted. And if our attention is somewhere else, that's like a bad time to try to engage someone because they have to change context and refocus. And they may not be able to hear, So it's like if someone's really concentrating, driving in traffic, and they're trying to make a left turn, it's a bad time to pop a question. And maybe the person won't even hear you. Because they're so focused on what they're doing. So that's kind of like being able to monitor a state of consciousness. Anyway, so that was the problem I was working on. And it was before I had any inkling of, what's meditation, what's brain performance, what's brain health. But I did recognize challenges that we experience as individuals, trying to manage our own consciousness in the context of a busy world. So that was the opening to start to study this. And when I actually got into measuring the brain and trying to take a hard look at what was happening in our consciousness, in my consciousness, that was going down the rabbit hole, and that's really like what happens when you practice mindfulness or meditation for the first time, it's like, whoa, what's going on in there? And as we start to unravel these things, we start to grow a much better understanding of how we may work with ourselves.
Hmm.
And then if you start to look at what we've learned over the ages of these practices, to realize that by doing practice, we can really change the way that we operate. And those changes can be very beneficial to how we function in life. And that's where the brain health and the brain performance come in there. And that is, we can take an active role in resculpting our neurology, or how our brain functions moment to moment, to really help us perform better and to feel better, in our life.
What would you say if asked to define brain health? And you mentioned words like attention. And
Mhm,
so when you say attention, I think of how do we ground ourselves in the present moment? How do we stay focused? But
mhm.
what is brain health? And is it ostensibly the same for everyone, or is it different for different people with different types of learning styles, for
Yeah,
example?
yeah, yeah. So I think it's a huge question, and we kind of have to piece it apart to be able to speak about it.
Hmm.
Um, but on one end of the spectrum, we have brain pathology, which can be what happens when we get old, what happens in cognitive decline, what happens if we have a brain injury, uh, what happens if we never sleep. So there are a lot of things that like on a structural level, we notice like pretty serious degradation in the brain, and that can have obviously severe implications in our life. So I think that's a dimension of brain health, which is very important.
Hmm.
Um, and certainly, as we all get into our, elder years, cognitive decline becomes something that's really, it affects all of us. It really does affect all of us in varying degrees. Um, so, um, so I'd say from that standpoint, it's a really important conversation uh, about what's happening there and what can we do about it. But I think outside of that, what happens when we go from like having a reasonably healthy brain to brain pathology? If we're kind of in the more of the healthy brain domain, there's a lot of things that affect our performance, and I think more importantly, how do we feel? Uh,
Hmm.
all the time. And our ability to act in life and to grow and to change and adapt really is so affected by how we feel moment to moment. Um,
Yeah. And was that your inspiration for starting Muse, or you were studying a lot of these things and your
yeah.
interests really preceded your co-founding of Muse,
hmm
but
Well, I think,
it had to do with the technology that
well,
you
it did. Yeah, it did and it didn't. And the
okay.
technology was a gateway for me actually to become more aware of and interested in what was happening in my consciousness.
Yeah.
And, when I was starting to do this, when we're younger, and if we are in a, reasonable, emotional balance with good opportunity in life, often the things that we are interested in are different than, when we're hitting the edges somehow, like, we find ourselves, in a state of depression or, or low mood. I mean, that can be really debilitating. And as with, certain, um, variations in our own cognitive styles. And so we have something we call ADHD. That's an example of, something where we can feel afflicted by how our brain functions in a very real way. But I think for myself, I mean, when you, um, are in the process of research or founding a company, I mean, often what's moving you are your own personal interests. And I think for myself, getting into this area, what really fascinated me is I saw the opportunity to really operate in a more effective way in the world. And that I saw that being able to unlock a variety of things for myself. One of them was being able to, tackle bigger problems, do more things that I wanted to do, and also, increasing my ability to adapt. Having a deeper, more fulfilling human experience. And so I would say I was landing more in, I was interested in brain performance,
Mhm.
and I may not have used the word health at that time.
Gotcha. Were you also thinking about, when you think about brain performance, were you thinking about depression, anxiety, some of the, brain challenges that many people have.
100%. Like I got there,
Yeah.
but at the beginning, no, right? In the
Okay.
beginning, because I didn't
Yeah.
feel those things on a personal level,
Yeah.
I was more identified with, what does it mean if I improve my attention?
Mm.
What can I enter different states of consciousness that can change my experience of living? And
Mhm.
what does that mean? So I think the doors I was opening personally at first were really driven by that curiosity. And it was like just seeing the opportunities.
Yeah.
And I did see some of the problems. Like I saw the problem of what happens when we are bombarded all the time with distractions, and how do we make sense of this world we live in where we're being, bombarded, so much by many changing kinds of information and trying to be seduced by this or that advertisement. Like once you start looking into your consciousness, you really see how much you're being thrown around by your environment, especially, the environment created by information technology. So that was a real problem that I felt. But
Yeah.
it didn't take very long before I really started to understand in a greater degree the implication to the sort of broader brain health problems and questions. And this really just comes from the fact that, once you start tuning into yourself more deeply and you start to learn, or be in contact, with, people who are struggling with these different things. And I think, taking the turn and heading down the contemplative path and learning about meditation, you become more face to face with people who are processing different, you know, you know problems or dimensions of their uniqueness. And so very quickly the awareness and understanding grew in myself, and I could see the possibilities of technology as well as different therapeutic techniques to make a real difference in how we live. And so, it was not long before I ended up in this sort of like this broader brain health picture and became interested in
Yeah.
how the technology could be applied.
Well, and also merging the technology with some of the practices that are ancient, like meditation. And that was one of the things, I mean, that's where Muse started, really. It's like measuring what's going on in your brain as you meditate.
Mhm.
And what's your, like, when you first started developing the Muse technology, what was your goal? Like, was it to help people see what happens in their meditation practice? Because I know that over the years, Muse has evolved so much in terms of what its capabilities are.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious, what was that then and what is it now?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, um sometimes, I have a hard, I don't ever tell this story, right? Because I don't know how relevant it is anymore. It's like, we all have our personal journeys here. But in the very, very early stages, um you have a very provocative technology that's giving you a window into something you've never seen before, especially a window into yourself, where you can start to look at the functioning of your own being in a way that you haven't been able to have a reflection of before. And that provokes a lot of questions. And I would say that for the first, um, couple of years that we were working on, let's say the project of Muse, and before we even made a technology, physical technology, before we made a brain sensing device, we were using other brain sensing devices that others had made.
Oh,
And at that point, it was really just an investigation of what does this technology open for us. And when you get into this paradigm of neurofeedback, what you're doing basically is you're taking an aspect, like a measurable aspect of yourself, and you're feeding it back to yourself in a way that you can now perceive consciously. And just like looking in a mirror can teach you things about how you're standing or how you express or whatever. um, Having this reflection of an inner process, allows you to develop a different kind of awareness and ask a whole bunch of questions. And so in the first couple of years of our existence, a lot of what we did was play in that domain. And we would build different kinds of experiences where we could experience ourselves, but through this kind of paradigm of feedback, whether individually or in a group or something. And I don't think we exactly knew where we were going. It's certainly I didn't know where I was going. I was really just being the explorer, going like, oh my goodness, like what do I know from this? You know,
Hmm.
um what am I learning? And there was a point where I think, we were trying to figure out what our business was. And you always kind of ask yourselves these questions like, what is the killer application for this technology? And the thing that I kept coming back to is there some way that we can package this inner explorative journey that we're going on, where we get a reflection and we investigate our own experience of being? Because I was finding personally so much, gratification, learning, depth in that exploration. I was like, can we wrap up this in some way so that people can all take this journey for themselves? And one of our co-founders, Trevor, he's like, "What about meditation?"
Ah.
And it's because it sounds what you're describing. It sounds a little bit like what we do, how we talk about meditation, right?
Yeah.
And I was like, "What's that?" Pretty much, pretty much. And like everybody else at the time, this is a long time ago, a long enough ago, I shouldn't say a long time ago, but long enough ago that meditation really wasn't, a buzzword at all, in our cultures. So a lot's changed since then. But anyway, so as part of that process, we started to get to know deeper practitioners in the contemplative arts to try to learn about what they're doing, to see if potentially this is something
Got
that
it.
um,
Yes.
anyway. But as soon as we got into that, I know for myself, as soon as I started learning from some people who really knew something about
Yeah.
meditation, it was just like, oh my goodness, whoa. Like it was I really had this feeling of, why didn't somebody tell me this like 20 years ago,
Yeah.
when I was just like learning how to like operate in this universe? Because it really felt like, okay, humanity has been studying the thing that I've been so interested in for eons, and I just didn't know. I didn't really know that there
Right.
had been like this such a deep investigation in how we can um, transform ourselves from the inside out. But it's part of it's about awareness, right?
Self-awareness. Yes,
What's happening
absolutely.
inside this experience? But then, the maybe one of the greatest achievements is discovering that we can change ourselves from the inside out to such a radical degree. Obviously, I knew that we could learn new things. You go to school and you learn to do some cool stuff, but we can radically change how we feel and how we function, um, to the extent, where the individuals are almost uh, irrecognizable with each other. So the amount that we can transform ourselves is way beyond what I ever thought was possible. And that's where ideas like enlightenment kind of come in there. It's like, what is that? Well, that's radical human transformation, and that is
Yeah.
believed to be possible.
And you were developing the technology to help encourage all of that learning and that self-awareness. And so over the years now, the technology has changed quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And you've launched like new products with new goals.
Mm-hmm.
One was for improving sleep. And the
Mm-hmm.
most recent one, which is called Athena, is really about um, mental fitness. And it goes back to brain health, but I think of mental fitness very much like physical fitness, right? Like we go to the gym every day and we do our workout and we're trying to be as strong as we can. And so, how does that compare with the mental fitness or focus and rest and recovery? Like, how does all that fit into Athena?
Mm-hmm. I like your huge questions. um, well, okay. So first of all, we all use our brains all the time. And I think when we think about training our minds, what we're really doing is we are retraining ourselves for like a more optimal way of functioning.
Right, right.
But I mean, we obviously get our daily brain exercise just living. So it's not exactly like, um, mm, just get your brain busy, So it's like doing its exercises. It's really about strategically going in and developing some core skills that unlock a lot of things that we, let's say, by accident, uh, keep ourselves from.
Hmm.
Uh, so I say by accident because the one of the very cool aspects of it being a human is that we are very adaptable and we're constantly adapting. And whatever we're doing with our brains in any moment, our our brain is adapting to do more efficiently. And one of the issues, well, the benefit of that is very clear. We become better at what we do, and we become more optimal at things we're doing. So it takes less energy to continue to function in the same way. The potential downside of that is you might be adapting in a way that ultimately is not serving feeling happy and well and fulfilled and able to actually function in a very high level to do the things you want to do. And so you could call those bad habits, right? So your brain can develop bad habits, and we can also um, train ourselves to be more adept at things that are good habits. So I think this idea that um, we are in a very strategic way retraining some habits that are very useful to us so that they're available to us and they don't atrophy. And so in Athena we introduced this like a paradigm to understand these core pillars of brain health.
Okay.
And um, so we divided this into three pillars. We have something we call mental clarity,
Yep.
we have mental strength, and we have mental recovery. And we'll start with recovery because that's maybe the simplest to describe.
Okay.
And that is when we are, um, you know, when we are going through a process of change, if we don't properly rest, it's very difficult for your body and your brain to adapt. Obviously, we need rest generally so that we can stay functional. But when we are trying to make changes to how we function, it's even more important. Like if you're an athlete and you work out really hard, you need to rest. If you're learning new things, you need to rest. And it's in the rest that we, the suggestions we're making, to the neural networks of our brain and our body have that opportunity to change and adapt. And that's super important. But then these two other pillars I think are like worth really talking about more deeply. And mental clarity is what we really have been, let's say, trying to help people develop for years with the core Muse meditation practice. And it's really honestly just about training attention. I shouldn't
Hmm.
say just, right? I mean, that's the core focus is training attention. Um, and if you look at the contemplative traditions, um, almost everything you encounter has attention training as like the fundamental, first building block of everything that comes, and you never drop it
Hmm.
as something that you do intentionally, forever for your life, to be able to continue to hone your brain skill of staying in a state of focused attention. And yeah, I mean, one of the reasons for why we need to continue to practice is, as we know, life is distracting. Our emotions are distracting, and um, when we follow those distractions, what we're doing is we are practicing being distracted. And we need to continually provide the antidote for that. It's like, if you have like, your lawn or your hedge or something, you need to continually cut the grass or trim things because it overgrows. This is kind of a similar phenomena. Like just the process of living the way we do um,
Hmm.
necessitates that we take an active role in staying fit because how we use our brains tends to take us in the other direction. So it's kind of like a base maintenance, but if you don't have it, you need to put a lot of work in to try to build the skill back again.
Why do some people have the ability to focus naturally more than others? Like you see this with some people, they can cut the grass for hours or have no problem cooking a 4-hour meal, or, and then there are other people that are just like multitasking and moving between things and also doing great things, but it's just their ability to focus for more than 20 minutes is very difficult.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we're all wired a bit differently, and there's also different kinds of attention.
Right.
So just because you are getting into like a single focused task doesn't necessarily mean, first of all, that you're really present, right? So you can get into doing something and you kind of almost enter like a trance like state.
Mm.
And I think the thing that we're practicing is not being in a state, because that can be, you can think of that as a state of reduced consciousness. And often if
Interesting.
you're really, really good at like going and like super focusing on one thing, then in your attention training, you typically would work at the opposite thing, which is expanded awareness.
Mm.
Both are states of attention, but we might have an individual bias towards one kind of attention. And that can be like your happy place or your go-to place. But in order to stay flexible, we're constantly shuttling our attention to, let's say, a wide view
Mm-hmm.
and a narrow view. And if you gravitate to one thing, you're actually not, getting the benefit of the, being able to expand and contract your field of awareness, in this adaptive, balanced way. So I think, overtraining in any one thing can have its issues.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah.
But would you say the concept of mental fitness would include being able to go back and forth between those states because you have that control?
Yes.
You're not letting whatever is outside of you yank you around. You're
Mhm.
making a choice.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So maintaining the agency is super important.
Mm-hmm.
And then training the different kinds of attention is also very important. And so in meditation, there are two very fundamental practices related to attention. One's called focused attention, where you really contract your field of awareness, so it's very targeted.
Mm-hmm.
And the other one is, some people call it open monitoring, but it's really where you expand your field of awareness to try to include everything.
Yeah.
And again, being in an undistracted way. Distracted means you're following involuntarily like a train of thought. And undistracted means that you are present with all of this incoming sensory information.
What's interesting about that, because I was just interviewing someone this morning, and we were talking about this idea of being able to hold what is uncomfortable, and the idea of open monitoring and seeing everything that is in your wide awareness, but not letting any single thing bother you or get the attention of anything else. It seems like that would have a really positive impact on being able to hold many things without being pulled into any single one thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I would actually even go further to say that, the primary thing that pulls us away are emotional reactions.
Emotional reactions and judgments. Yeah.
Right. And so whether it's a focused attention or an open awareness attention, the thing that pulls us away is the emotional reaction,
Mm-hmm.
or the feelings. And the stronger your attention, the stronger your ability to be with the sensations and not be carried away.
Right.
And what we do when we get carried away is typically we're trying not to feel something. So, very often being distracted is about trying not to feel something. It's like saying, let's escape this scenario and go somewhere else. Because to stay with it, you need to stay with whatever you're feeling. And this can be, the things that you're attracted to or the things that you are, repelled by.
Right.
And so, similarly, things like the bright, shiny object do similar things to our attention because we want to go like, oh, that thing, YouTube does this to me as soon as I put in the URL and I'm like, oh my God, like,
yes.
How strong is my attention, The algorithm hacked me.
No question. No question.
So, just back to that pillar, the thing we call mental clarity.
Mm-hmm.
Mental clarity is all about being present. And so when you are able to stay with your experience, whatever it is that is happening right now, and not distracting yourself when things get uncomfortable, or not following the rabbit when things are seductive, allows you to maintain a very clear perception of what's going on. Right? As soon as we go into the trap of distraction, we cut ourselves off from information we're receiving about the world. And so this is like a function of how our brain is. And this is, the concept is called top-down regulation. But in a simple way, what's happening is when we are distracted, we sever our connection with what's happening, and coming through our senses. So it's really disconnection, right? So we're connected to what's happening in the here and now in the present, and it's all your sensory experiences, thoughts, feelings, the whole of it. But when we become uncomfortable, we disconnect and we become unpresent, and we end up, in the realm of the monkey mind, you know, until we emerge next.
Yeah.
And that disconnection can make us feel a little safer, which is, and perhaps less uncomfortable. And maybe that's why we do it.
Yeah.
But anyway, what happens when you disconnect is you stop receiving information and you're in your own imaginary world, right? If I disconnect from my senses, what's left is Chris's imagination and whatever it wants to do to make Chris feel better. And when we disconnect, we lose clarity because we're in our imagined reality, not in the real reality where things are truly happening.
So how does Athena help with clarity and focus? And then we'll get to the other pillar, which is the strength and endurance. But so all of everything you're saying is just so absolutely true. But how does practicing with Athena help us get to that state? For people who haven't seen the product or heard about it, or explain that to us.
Sure. Well, in many ways, it's very, very simple. The way this works. So, the way that we train any skill, right, is through an exercise that allows us to challenge the way that we currently do things and introduce a new way, right? So to practice a new pattern. And when we train our attention, we are essentially training ourselves to be present with our senses and not be carried off. And this takes us kind of like, central to the simplest and core practices of meditation. We didn't invent this, right? These things have been around for a long time because they really work. And that is, you pay attention to something, and when your mind wanders off, you bring it back. So it is really as simple as that. And so the most people who've encountered a little bit of meditation, they might hear the instructions to focus on your breath. And there's some very good reasons why that is a very good anchor for this kind of practice. So what you're asked to do is to focus on the sensations of your breath going in and out of your body, and to recognize when the mind, gets swirled off. And when that happens and you recognize it, you just come back to the exercise. This, very kind of monotonous and, boring exercise it might seem like at first, right? But that really provides a very structured and very powerful way to get the mind to stay and to not be carried off by all these little things that want to pull us away from what we're trying to do. So that is like a focused attention practice. And there are versions of it where you have a very narrow focus, and there are versions of it where you have a wide open focus. But the instructions are very, very similar across all these things. And it really involves, staying present and noticing. And when you notice that you're being carried off by something, you just come back to what you were supposed to be doing. And the way that Muse and Athena really helps you do that is it makes a brain measurement that is very much related to when your consciousness is connected in a very smooth way with this sensory experience, and when the mind sort of jumps off and start to do its like monkey dance. And we provide feedback, a sound feedback, to let people know that their mind has gone off track and they've lost that connected, stable attention with whatever the anchor is, like your breath.
And the idea is the more you practice that, the more you can do that in your everyday experiences.
Yes. Yeah. And there's sort of two reasons why the technology is so useful. The first thing is whenever we are practicing something, the more we practice the right thing as opposed to the wrong thing, the faster we progress. So if you sit down and you say, okay, I'm going to do this focused attention practice, and you spend 90% of the time, off in la la land, where do you think the practice has gone? And so to have something that can kind of break the cycle, to say like, hey, hello, remember? And for you to, excuse me, and for you to take, that feedback and get back to the task at hand. Every time you bring the brain back, you bring your consciousness back to what you told yourself you were going to do. That's like doing one exercise rep at the gym. And, to have this system that kind of real time monitors what your brain is doing and cues you when you've gone too far off to come back allows you to get more quality practice time in.
Yeah.
And that's sort of like one really simple, reason why the technology is helpful in the practice. The other thing is we have a very creative imagination. And so what can happen in your practice is you can imagine you're doing the practice. And, if you were doing a meditation, you can watch this happening because as you're, let's say, observing your breath, you start anticipating. It's like, okay, breathing out, breathing out. Okay, soon I'm going to be breathing in. Oh, okay, breathing in, breathing in. I'm going to breathe out soon. So as soon as we start projecting what's going to happen, right, that's planning. That is a conscious, thought process that's really not about what's happening in the present moment. What's happening in the present moment is, what am I feeling? What am I feeling? What am I feeling? And it's very interesting, like when you do this, and even in just a really simple practice, you realize that every single moment is totally different. But as soon as you start anticipating, you stop noticing all the differences because you're starting to project what you know. But it's a very easy trap to fall into.
Interesting.
And so having a reflection to let you know that you're, perhaps not engaging in the exercise, or at least just to question yourself if you are or you're not, can be super helpful. Because we can fall into this trap where we are believing that we're doing the practice and we're really not.
Yeah. What are the ways that you think it helps with cognitive decline? Do you think just in the act of practicing right behavior for your brain is supportive of your cognitive health over time?
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, I am not a world expert on this, but I can give you my, my take on this. So we do know that people who are continuously learning, staying creative, having new experiences
Right.
are the ones that seem to generally do better when it comes to, the aging game. And if you look at what the brain does, the more that you are playing it safe and doing the things that you already know, the easier life may feel, but the less that you are engaging in this part of our life experience where we're continuing to grow. Right? And so there's parts of our brain which really only are really active when we are leaning into new experiences. And so this continuous investigation of new experiences, I could say like, okay, are you leaning into the mystery of being? Which is really just saying, are you continuing to investigate like all that's happening that really is new and novel, and there's a possibility of learning from that to me is the key skill in being able to maintain like a really like well integrated and healthy brain, because we're continuing to number one, we're continuing to learn. And there's a growth aspect there, but also we are leveraging all the parts of ourselves that come alive only when we are in the new experiences, right? Only when we are, in the like, wow, what is going on here? Like, so some people have some really good habits around like, oh, I'm always like trying to learn something new. I'm always reading. I'm always trying to learn a new language, whatever it is. Some people have really put that pattern in for themselves in their life to stay in that kind of growth mindset approach. And I think it really, really serves people. But if we take a look at what we're doing this in this focused attention practice, or these practices of attention, what we're really doing is we're training the brain to be better able to, no matter like what we're feeling, if we're feeling safe, unsafe, happy, sad, whatever, we're training ourselves to be open to the new experience that the present moment offers, like in every single unfolding moment of life. And that really is that's really about staying in the mystery. It's like, I don't know what's happening right now. I have an idea, but I'm going to stay curious and in every moment leave myself open to new possibilities. And so what you're doing is you're actually training yourself to stay anchored in that growth place where we're always investigating and present with what's new. And part of that is not getting in the trap of playing it safe. And what does that feel like? Well, if I'm feeling a bit uncomfortable, I don't want to feel uncomfortable, because maybe it's uncomfortable because I don't know what this is. I don't know what I'm doing. Am I going to look dumb? What are people going to say about me? There's lots of reasons why, we might find ourselves in everyday moments taking the safe path. And I think especially as we age and we don't feel as capable to face adversity, it's so easy to go with what you know. And I think that's the trap, right? And so I think this clarity practice is actually at its very core, in the infinitesimal,
Amazing.
It's about that.
So let's jump for a second to the actual technology. So Athena uses EEG and fNIRS. Is that what it's called?
Yeah, fNIRS.
Okay.
Yeah,
fNIRS. Okay, and that is intended to somehow monitor the blood flow in your brain. I just want you, in a very, very simple way, to explain how those two work. And then I want to ask you a little bit about AI and how AI might be integrated into Athena.
Yeah, sure.
Okay,
so,
thanks.
EEG measures your brain's electrical activity. And one of the characteristics of electrical, let's say, funny, I immediately jumped to very technical engineering terminology. Anyway, those electricity waves in your brain,
simple.
They can travel. You can measure them from everywhere, right? Because in a sense, like all of this inside here is like sort of conductive, material, and because of that, the electrical measurements are available. So if you measure, like, let's say here and here, like Muse does, you're actually getting some reading from things that are happening in all different places in the brain. There are some conditions about, things that you can and can't read, and that would be, for a technical podcast. But for the most part, you are getting kind of like a macro signal where everything is mixed together, and you're hearing from all the parts of the brain. Now, the brain does have specialization. So, for instance, we know that in the back of the brain, we're processing a lot of our vision. And in the front of the brain, we often call this the executive center.
Right.
And so there are different parts of the brain that have, some specialization. And it would be very interesting to know both what's happening on a macroscopic picture and also what might be happening in a very particular area. And so the way that we're using this new technology, which you can call it fNIRS, or you could spell out what it actually stands for, which is functional near infrared spectroscopy. And let me just translate this into something which is like hopefully a lot simpler to understand. When we look at like tissue, brain tissue, your skin, when you have blood flowing through it, you can see that. In fact, you can look at your arms perhaps and see that your veins that are carrying deoxygenated blood look different, right? They have this greeny blue hue to it as opposed to red. And what you can detect when you look at tissue is you can actually detect the color shift. as a result of, how much like red blood is there, what's the density. And so if you have more red blood flowing somewhere, the area is going to look more red. And if you're using up a lot of oxygen, the blood becomes deoxygenated, it changes color a bit, and you can notice this color shift because you have now deoxygenated blood flowing in that area. And so with fNIRS, with the Athena device, I mean, you can actually see on the front of it, there's these like little windows. And what's happening here is in the middle, you have a light source that's creating in three different colors of light. And that light is passing through the skin. And really, I mean, we look pretty opaque here, but if you shine a flashlight, through your hand, it goes red. You can kind of see through your hand. Actually, we're fairly transparent. Yeah. And so when you have a light that's here in the middle of your forehead, it actually passes like through your skin, through the brain, through the skull into the brain. And you can actually see that light coming out in different places. I remember very, very early on, learning about different ways to measure brain activity. And I read this one book, this technique where you put a light bulb in your mouth.
Oh God.
And you measure the light that's coming out up here. I was like, what? That's crazy. But I mean, this happens to us all the time where we were outside in the sun passing through our head. So you can actually use sunlight as a way of measuring brain activity in this way, because you are able to see the changes in blood flow to the different parts of the brain. And when you're using a particular area of the brain, your body adapts and sends more blood there because it needs more energy. And so what we're simply measuring is the physiological changes that are happening moment to moment to send more blood to the areas of the brain that are being used more heavily. And so when we have, when we look at the Athena again, this is a light transmitter. These are two light receivers, and these are two more. Oh no!
If you're watching this on YouTube, you'll see what Chris is showing, or if you're watching it on the Muse site, you'll see it. If you're listening, maybe go check out YouTube to see what he's showing on the headband, or use your imagination.
So anyway, thanks, Patricia. So there's these two windows on either side where we're measuring the light that's just passed through the skin tissue. And then we have these two other windows further away. And what happens when you have, so I'll just point on my head here. So the light's going in here. If we measure the light that is emerging here
from his forehead,
from the middle of the forehead,
yep,
then the light, it goes into the body, and some of that light passes through the brain tissue. It also passes through the skin tissue, which has you can see like the heart, pumping, and you can see various things about blood flow through the periphery of your body, but you also see what's happening in the brain tissue. And so what's cool about that is we can look at this frontal area of the brain very specifically and see, is that part of the brain using more energy? And so when we are talking about the mental strength exercises in Athena, what we're looking at specifically is how is the blood flow changing in the very front of the brain, which is happening in that executive CEO control center, which is really responsible for, us staying on task and remembering things, and also kind of like rooting ourselves when we're having an emotional response. So it allows us to focus on that particular special area to see that we are engaging it in various different ways in tasks that we're doing.
Okay, great. Thanks. That was a good explanation. I appreciate that. And what about artificial intelligence? Is there a integration of that in the measurement of? Yes. Okay. You're nodding. Okay. You're like, yes.
Well, okay. So, it's a very exciting area for all of us right now, or scary. There's a lot of things happening. And the thing that artificial intelligence is doing for us is, so the brain is the most complicated thing that we know of, forever. And this continues. We struggle to understand, what we know about it, and also how we work with it better. So, the way that we're using AI is to do a better interpretation of the signals that we measure to make a better inference about what's truly happening, in our minds, in our consciousness, in our emotions. And then when we help people by creating these different training paradigms to train these different core skills, can we make a better decision about what we recommend to do? And can we make those exercises themselves more personalized and adaptive, because this is not a one size fits all situation. We're so different.
Right,
Uh,
right.
the ways that we can intervene can be really personalized to provide that really. So as you, I think, were
It's
asking
amazing.
before,
Yeah.
are you the person who like really gets in the zone, or do you have a different kind of brain, right? And how do we adapt how we train to to our unique skills?
Yeah. Yeah. Amazing. Well, what is something that you have personally learned about your brain through all of these different iterations of Muse?
Wow. Okay. So many things. So many things. Let me see if I can find something that is
Okay,
would be
that you
helpful.
can share with the population.
One thing that I um this happened quite early on and was very interesting to me, and that was discovering that there were much deeper states of attention or concentration than I ever knew or I could experience.
Yeah.
And that had a really profound impact on me, because it really showed me in a tangible way that I could, through a kind of exercise, discover an experience
Yeah.
that was available inside of me that I couldn't have dreamed of. And you don't know what it feels like until you're in it. And all of these like different skills that we learn, have great utility once you know they exist. Um, and so that really opened some doors for me, because suddenly I found my mind open to the possibility that there's something out there that goes beyond my imagination or conception. Um, and that was such an important opening, because I personally was like pretty stubborn know-it-all. I know what's going on. I know what's happening inside of me. Like,
And then
don't tell me
came
about me.
the surprises.
And then to discover that, like a new world essentially,
Hmm. No,
and that someone could lead me there,
yeah,
made me curious
yeah,
and also made me like skeptical about my own knowing. Like, do I really know?
yeah,
And there's judgment in that. There's a ton of judgment, and dropping the judgment,
yeah,
the inner judgment,
yeah.
allowed suddenly like so much more growth and opportunity, because I stopped saying like, oh no,
I
that's,
know everything.
yeah, that's not
Well,
happening.
you and your higher consciousness and understanding that there's more out there than you ever could have even imagined. Has it helped you in your day to day moods and in your interpersonal relationships with other people and how you work on a daily basis? Would you say?
Yeah, so much.
Undoubtedly.
And first of all, totally improved my relationships, how I feel, how I work. Now, why? Now, why did that happen? Why did that happen? So, um, if you just so um, one dimension of this is, I've always been quite a sensitive person, and one thing I didn't realize is whenever I was feeling, um, you know, emotionally distressed, I would check out.
Mm,
I would disconnect in some way. And when you do that, and this can happen either because of something that's going on in your own inner ecology, or
mhm,
because of someone that you're with or talking to or having an experience with. So we feel other people's feelings too. And when you check out, you stop being able to understand or connect with another being in a deep way. And I think the first, like the foundation of human relationship, is really to be able to be present with people and to share experience. It's like compassion and empathy. What's your ability to be empathetic? And I didn't realize this, but I had, um, the result is lower empathy, because I was a sensitive person. So I feel a lot. I feel what people are feeling a lot, which is great. But if you're checking out, it's not happening. And so that was really a game changer for me, was to recognize that I was checking out, and that I had the ability, especially if I worked at it, to stay with it. And if you stay with it, you stay connected, you understand people, and you're able to like really connect, on that like deeper,
mhm.
human
Yeah,
level.
yeah.
And that had huge ripple effects in all of my life. to discover that.
That's amazing. Chris, it's been a good several years at Muse, and you've grown so much personally. How lucky is that?
It's yeah, I
It's
mean, I
amazing.
super grateful that I can work on something that benefits others and me too.
Exactly. Exactly. Thank you so much for coming on today. I really appreciate you being on Untangle. Is there any last words that you want to share before we close?
Oh wow. Well, I mean,
It's a lot of pressure.
I'm honestly I'm very excited about the new technology,
Yeah.
Athena.
Yeah.
And a lot of things are moving for us, and a big part of it is the how AI is helping us accelerate some of the things that we're doing. And so we have some really great things coming this year to build on what Athena can do. And so, I mean, I'm really hoping we can get a lot of my dreams out into the field. But
Yeah.
we have some really amazing new ways to work with sleep, uh, and and also on this sort of the integration of a new technology. I mean, one really wild thing is the combination of these technologies, fNIRS and EEG. People have been experimenting with this in the lab for a little while, but it's been quite hard to do, and no one has ever been able to look at any scale what actually, what's actually happening in the interrelationship between the blood flow in our brain, and what's happening in the electric field. And I really think there's some keys to broaden our understanding and really see how this can open up, totally new ways of helping ourselves, but also kind of furthering research in the field.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty excited about the science that's going to be done as well.
Great. Thank you, Chris. Thanks so much for being here. So appreciate it.
Thanks, Patricia.